Of your screen. He was appearing before a committee that is investigating what happened with the Trudeau Foundation, in particular some reporting that the Globe and Mail has done around a 2016 donation. You heard a lot about it, or about the series of donations over the past 2 hours. The Prime Minister's brother, basically the headline, I think, out of that testimony is nothing to see here. He insists that there was nothing nefarious about the donations, that the people who donated it, though they did have certain ties to the Chinese regime, did not have nefarious intentions. He said especially that the biggest point he kept making over and over was that there's no foreign interference here, the allegation being that that donation was made to eventually curry favor with through the Chinese government with the current government, led by his brother, rather. And he says that it was in no way the case, that his initial conversations around that donation happened well before Justin Trudeau became Prime Minister. He said a whole lot of other things, and the opposition put a lot of questions his way. So joining me now to unpack what we heard over the past few hours, our front bench. With me this evening, former Nova Scotia Premier Stephen McNeil. I'm sorry, the prompter isn't working, so I'm just going to use your names and then we'll correct your titles later. The ones that I know, former Alberta Cabinet Minister Gary Mar, I think you're now, Stephen McNeil is now a strategic advisor for Cox & Palmer in Halifax. Gary Mar is now head of Canada West, the CEO of the Canada West Foundation. There we go. Joyce Napier is CTV Ottawa's Ottawa Bureau Chief, CTV News' Ottawa Bureau Chief. And Melanie Richer, who used to be former Communications Director to Jagmeet Singh, is now with Earnscliffe Strategies. There we go. Got it all in. Hi, everybody. Sounds like the last 2 hours. Joyce, what's your read on what just happened?
Well, I think that he was genuinely coming to defend the foundation, and I thought that that was refreshing, considering, you know, what has been going on so far. Somebody needed to come and say, this is a foundation that helps students research, higher learning. The objective of the foundation is sound. Now, did he know about any interference? It seems not. This is not a politician. It was clear to us, and kind of refreshing to hear somebody that is not a politician, that probably has not even been briefed, clearly hasn't been briefed before. Don't say this, say that, you know, like other witnesses who have come before this committee. So there wasn't a battery of lawyers around him telling him what to say and what not to say. And he was kind of genuine in a way.
There he is leaving
and there he is leaving. I think he wanted to come. He asked to come. He was not begged to come or forced to come. And I think that it was about time that, notwithstanding all the other allegations and whatever's happening, that we have we haven't seen the evidence of. He came to defend a foundation, and I think for that he did a pretty good job. I'm sure that he will be judged very differently from different perspectives, but I think that this is a foundation that has done, and hopefully will continue to do, notwithstanding this scandal, if it is one, is doing incredible work. And I think that the opposition lost track of that, and it's a bit of a scorched earth strategy. And so what if the Trudeau Foundation has to die because of this? I think that we have to think about the students and about the research that this foundation does. And I think that actually he succeeded in doing that. But obviously, you know, did he succeed in cleaning it, in trying to tone down this whole China influence thing? I don't think so.
Well, I think a couple points to that, Gary, and I'll get you to weigh in. I mean, his basic thesis was, this isn't about foreign interference where the Trudeau Foundation is concerned. It's a management crisis. That's what he would posit it all boils down to. I thought where he was prodded somewhat successfully by the opposition, though, was on his own views on China and sort of this view that I think is widely accepted, that things were different in 2016, sure, but then he was asked quite frequently, you know, how much different do you think it is now? And he was a little less clear in answering those questions.
Yeah, I mean, let me say, first of all, credit to Mr. Trudeau for this. I mean, if you're going to sit in a hot seat, you better have a pretty thick bottom, and I think he was well prepared for this. I don't think there are any questions that were put before him that he hadn't heard before, so I think he probably was questioned and briefed on this. But I would say this. I mean, let's put this in context. And you know, Glenn McGregor talked about this at the beginning of the show, and that's, you know, almost 20 years ago, or just over 20 years ago, China acceded to the WTO. I think there was a large viewpoint that Western governments were expecting liberalization and democratization of China. That didn't happen. 10 years ago, you had countries wanting to do trade with China, taking opportunities in the fastest growing economy in the world. And then, you know, over the last 10 years, you've had universities, University of Montreal, University of Toronto, all seeking to bring in Chinese students, Chinese scholars, Chinese money. And I think that there has been a real sea change, though, in this sense. The two Michaels, I think, was really a tipping point for how people now view the efforts of the Chinese government to exercise their soft power. Now, there's more than one CSIS. I'm not talking about the Canadian Security Intelligence Service, but the Center for Strategic and International United States has actually written about the cautionary tale of what's happened in Australia. And I think that I'll say that all diplomats are all about soft power. I mean, our diplomats go all around the world hoping to influence what goes on in Washington or in Japan or in the UK. Things that are above board and transparent, that is legitimate public diplomacy. Now, things that are covert or coercive and, below a bit opaque, that is not a legitimate, public diplomacy. And I think that this is the issue that Canada has to grapple with from a public policy point of view, as they have in Australia. And you've seen how Australia's been very strong in their position in the South China Seas. It hasn't wavered, in spite of the fact that, China is Australia's #1 market destination for their exports. And so you have to be able to do both. You need to take care and not be naive about security issues in Canada, while at the same time being able to maintain trade and diplomacy between two countries.
Ultimately, I think from a political perspective, Stephen, the opposition is looking to draw some ties, right, between the motivation behind this donation and ultimately the federal government's stance towards China, and in particular the Prime Minister's. Do you think that that came through today?
I think that's obvious what the opposition is trying to do. I think Sasha did a good job of laying out the facts from his point of view about the relationship that happened between the University of Montreal and these Chinese businessmen, and the fact that they wanted to go, or the university wanted them to use the Trudeau Foundation. Gary is absolutely right. Over the last 15 years or more, we've seen educational institutions looking at opportunities in China. I know all over Canada, you're looking at governments looking to do trade opportunities. Comparing China today to what it was in 2016, 2010, 2013 is a very different world, people's points of view of it. Many people in that committee would have had a very different view of China in 2010, 2013, and indeed 2015. Some of them were members of a government that actually tried to cultivate a trade relationship, when Prime Minister Harper was in government. So I think when you put it all in the context, I thought Sasha did a good job of defending the Trudeau Foundation. And, as someone who has a number of siblings, and I was never the Prime Minister, but I ran a provincial government, it becomes, I felt quite relieved, quite frankly, because it's not just my siblings who don't care about what I did in public life. It was nice to know that his family too. And the other big things that happened here today was I found out that Sasha wouldn't travel with Mr. Chrétien because they have different points of view on how they travel. And I found it really ironic that the Conservatives were defending the media today, after Sasha was quite harsh on a number of media outlets, and leave it to the Conservatives to come to their defense today. So it was a revelation of a whole bunch of things today.
Yeah, stranger things have happened. Melanie, what's your read on this? Yes, exactly. The success or lack thereof of the testimony today. Like, what do you think it does in particular to the issue of foreign interference and its dominance in political headlines recently.
Right. So obviously the context here is this is one issue out of a whole lot of issues around China and foreign interference as of late. So as it relates to today, I think, like everybody has said, that Mr. Trudeau did quite a good job to defend the foundation and separate it from the Prime Minister. The one question that I found interesting was, can you tell us about the processes that are in place to make sure that that separation existed? So that, to me, was maybe the one place where, oh, how was there not actually official processes in place to make that happen? But again, when you go back to the bigger scene, this really is just one thing, or one news story that has really come out of this whole Chinese interference piece. So when you're talking to regular folks, when they're looking at this committee, I don't think you're coming away with anything other than, okay, maybe the Trudeau Foundation is fine. But as it relates to the bigger piece, we still aren't any closer to, well, is there legitimate interference? What are we doing about it? Who knew about it when? So those questions are still unanswered, and I know that wasn't the purpose of today, was to actually get to all of those answers. But for folks watching at home, I think Mr. Trudeau, I'm going to say Mr. Trudeau did a good job to separate himself from Mr. Trudeau, which maybe sounds funny, but I think he did a good job today. But those bigger questions of how do we know the Prime Minister didn't know of these other allegations, I think are still to be answered. So we'll need to do